This is Terry Battisti with the Bass Fishing Archives, and I'm sitting here with Classic 45 contender Mike McClelland. And Mike's going to tell us about how he got into this bass fishing thing, and the story's pretty interesting. So, Mike?
You know, essentially growing up on Table Rock Lake, my uncle was a guide, owned a resort on Table Rock, and spent hours and days guiding his clients, and it was something I wanted to do badly, you know, and he was always so busy that it was tough for him to find time to just get me out there. But I actually started bass fishing when I was probably, 7 or 8 years old. My uncle was able to take me and got the interest in me going, and then in turn I got my dad involved in the sport, and essentially my dad and I grew up learning to bass fish together. I mean, it was one of those deals. He didn't know anything about it when I started, so we learned together, and he's a big part of why I'm where I'm at today. He's always supported my desire to be a professional angler, and was the one that paid an entry fee that allowed me to win 10 grand when I was 17 years old, that kind of solidified the fact that this is what I want to do.
Right. So your first tournament was a jackpotter?
Definitely. I fished jackpot tournaments Tuesdays, Fridays, Wednesdays on the local lake I lived on at that time was Beaver Lake, and had some success even early on there. Won some big basses. Might have even won one or two of those jackpot tournaments as the years went on. But then jumped off into the it was Red Man back then, Operation Bass events. Qualified for a couple regionals, and really the thing that got my career launched would have been the Central Pro-Am Association that started there in southwest Missouri. Ernie Daugherty did a phenomenal job with Central Pro-Am. It allowed me to fish as a pro with a co-angler, an amateur in the boat. I learned a lot about how to, I studied the sport and learned how to fish the way I needed to fish to win, and actually won Central Pro-Am Championship in 1992, and that allowed me to put a little money back and start preparing my entrance into bass. It was actually a couple years later I finished second in the Central Pro-Am Championship, had enough money saved to go fish the BASS Invitationals. And as things would go, I mean, it's pretty hard to believe, but the first two Bass Invitationals of the full season that I fished, I actually won back-to-back on the Arkansas River and Ross Barnett. So that pretty well launched my career. Now, I was humbled for a few years after that, but it was definitely a career launcher and established myself in the industry. And fortunately, I've been blessed with a lot of things since then. A number of other wins on the Elite Series level and Open Championship, and it's just been a great ride, man.
Right. But you were saying the tournament that really, really told you that you were going to be a bass fisherman was the 1987 U.S. Bass Chickamauga Dream Tournament. Can you tell us a little bit about that event?
It really was, and it was really cool to be back at Chickamauga last year for Bass Fest. It was actually the first time I had fished Chickamauga since 1987.
Oh, wow.
So to be back at Chickamauga, to realize that this is kind of what turned my whole career path around. I was in school studying architecture. I was planning to go to college, had my mind set on being an architect, and when you're 17 years old and you go to a tournament event and you compete with, it was the Ken...
Larry Nixon was there.
Yeah, Larry Nixon. Ken Cook actually won the event. I fished with Gary Klein. It was just amazing to compete against those guys and to actually finish 6th overall in that event and put 10 grand in my pocket. That was when I changed my whole career path and said, the heck with architecture. I'm going to be a pro bass fisherman.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what did you win or get 6th place in that tournament on?
That was a really unique tournament. It was actually one of the first Pro-Am based tournaments. However, the amateurs were fishing for the same prize pool as the pros. So it was one of those scenarios. I finished 6th overall. I didn't have any control over where we fished, how we fished, but I had to fish the baits that were comfortable for me, and I caught fish on a rattle trap, I caught fish on a spinnerbait, caught fish on a crankbait. It was a pretty wide open event.